Okay, you guys, so I recently rewatched the episode of The Magicians where Q is basically trapped in a mental institution in his mind called The World in the Walls. I'm pretty sure it's episode 3 or 4 of the first season of The Magicians, and I wanted to break it down and ask questions. Is this problematic? Is it making commentary on problematic depictions of mental health? What exactly is happening in this episode? So first we have the setup. We have Q looking around and learning, where am I? What is happening here? And so much so that he is then taken into the doctor's office and told what is happening. And it's framed in a very way of are we really doing this again, Q? We've told you this before. Very, very awful ways of broaching it. Very clear ways into trick the audience and trick Q into believing this illusion. The doctor does say, "You're very sick, very, very sick," and that kind of sets up the whole episode. So Q is portrayed as the quote-unquote only, I don't like saying sane or normal because, again, this is like a gross, I would hope, an over-exaggerated depiction of mental health and people who are in mental institutions. This is very unrealistic, but he is kind of contrast to characters like Elliot and Alice until he is tricked that he is quote-unquote crazy and having delusions. And the audience then, we are again tricked into believing this until Jules is disturbed and the illusion is broken for the audience finally. So he is quote-unquote normal. Again, I hate saying that. I want to make that abundantly clear. Compared to Elliot, a crazy addict is the stereotype, archetype, whatever you want to call it, and Alice, the person believing in aliens. Both, again, very problematic depictions. They are portrayed as quote-unquote insane people in a mental hospital. This is not how mental illness works. I want to make, again, this abundantly clear. And it shows a worse depiction of it, a very bad depiction of mental health. But we also do see some foreshadowing here, interestingly enough. First, Alice saying, "I'll still mate with you," and then Elliot saying, "Me three," is foreshadowing of all of their relationships, their romantic relationships with Q in a way. And again, the question here is this purposely making a statement about stereotypes in media, in these mental institutions in media, or is this straight up bad and wrong representation? It is bad and wrong to an extent to portray people like this, but we'll circle back to this later. So now I want to talk about the specific discrepancies within this world that hint the audience to knowing that this is fake. This is an illusion that Q is experiencing a spell that is being cast on Q. So first, Q corrects Dr. Fogg, aka Dean Fogg in doctor form, that Alice references not Dean Fogg as like, that's an episode of Star Trek, and Q is like, actually that's an episode of Lost in Space. And there's this like little detail of what's happening here? There's something off here. This is clearly not real. And this is interesting to me because it's almost as if when we, the audience, see these discrepancies, Q gets more trapped into the illusion, whereas the audience gets more confirmation that it is an illusion, until finally is extra confirmed when we see Penny and then cut into the real world and what is happening with the other magicians. And another clear discrepancy here that I forgot to mention was that Julia says, "I wanted to see the fireworks, I really did," when he never told her that what he did was fireworks. And that's interesting here too, because these things almost convince Q. Penny almost convinces Q, but Q falls back into it. He falls back into it. We are convinced because we get confirmation eventually, but Q falls back into the illusion, which is the most interesting part of this episode, I think. It really is Q grappling. What this episode is, and we'll get to this even more at the end, is Q grappling with his relationship to magic, but in this, when he's under a spell, and how he wants to use magic. I also wanted to address Penny in this episode, and how Penny is portrayed, and how a minority having an accent, a brown person having an accent, is the butt of a joke. And Penny does address this, and he's like, that's racist, like, what the heck? But it's also like, why did we need to have a racist joke? Let me know what you think about that if you are a brown person, or I'd love to know your thoughts about that. I don't particularly like that, because I don't know how comfortable the actor was with that. They just wrote it in and expected him to perform it, and that would be fine. And if they had any sensitivity readers saying, hey, maybe we shouldn't do this, or okay, this is fine, right? Anywho, so, and what's specifically interesting about him summoning Penny is one of the first true integrated musical scenes in the Magicians. We have it set up that Penny does not like the song. This is set up from the beginning of the episode because it was established in a previous episode, and it summons Penny to find Q and again confirm the delusion. So that's really cool. Like, Q uses it, the writers use Shake It Off to continue the story, to get Penny to find Q, and domino effect eventually save Q in the episode. So very cool. So I suppose that the point of this episode is that this is a horrible thing to do with someone who struggles with mental health as much as Q, but it does not give an excuse to portray mental illness as it does, like crazy or not. The show trying to say, look, these characters and doing this spell is uber problematic and wrong, including this representation of mental health, or is it just not doing that? It's kind of making a commentary on that, but why do we ultimately, the exaggerated portrayal of mental health, I do think is a purposeful statement in this episode, but if we look way ahead in the show, particularly with justifying Q offing himself at the end, it's so later and ultimately problematic. Yeah, so ultimately it is problematic, even if they are trying to make some sort of commentary here. In the grand scheme of the TV show as a whole, they do address mental health and like a realistic representation of mental health, and you could say this is purposeful and this is making commentary about it. However, at the very end, they justify Q himself, someone who struggled with self-harm and for a long time. And that's just, I don't know, I think it makes it all the more complicated and layered, this episode. Just the fact that, and then just the representation as a whole, the fact that the one Black woman that we see in the show, I believe, is a crazy doctor in Q's imagination, but then also like partially in real life, it's based off a real doctor, fine, but ultimately that's unfortunate that that's the one Black woman they have as a speaking role in the show, from my memory. Comment below, let me know if I'm wrong about that. And okay, so what is the real message in the show? I mentioned this briefly before, but the ultimate message of the show is it kind of starts to show the realness of the Magicians as these characters grapple with their relationship to magic and the real world, i.e. magic and the real world, because magic is integrated and a part of the real world in this show. Quote, "I'm everything I ever wanted to be and then nothing." That kind of just takes the cake of the realness message of this episode and as a whole the Magicians. So you can be everything you want to be, but falling in the trap of thinking you can't, only to get yourself into it, like, so if you fall back into the trap of thinking you can't, you're the only person who can truly pull yourself out. And I think that is like the base level message of it. Again, magic is a metaphor of amplified reality in The Magicians and real struggles, but also real joy. That will never cease to amaze me. I love how The Magicians just uses magic as a plot device, just as it uses everything else, and music in particular. The Magicians is just really good at using all of these things to progress the plot and as a part of the plot and not just there for fun, right? It's there as a purpose. Yeah, so, and these two quotes at the end really hammer down what the actual message of the episode is. Quote, magic does not solve problems. And then the dean is cut off by Q. It magnifies them. I know that. Believe me. And then Q says, I don't need to be taught what magic is or isn't. I need to be taught magic so I can decide what it is for me. And that's awesome. And I think that is, ultimately it does. Again, I think it is really important to sit with this text. Ultimately, I do think this shows that the entirety of the episode does have a solid, good message. And I think there is certain commentary here of supporting yourself and your mental health journey and such like that. But also, there are a lot of problematic things here, and I don't know if the ultimate message of the show justifies those things. Let me know what you think. Comment below. Follow me. Do all the things. I hope your Friday, yay, has gone smoothly. And yeah, have a great weekend.